So my perspective is, if we're gonna make a color etching, I'm gonna try to do it in as few places possible. If you can truly prove to me that you need another plate, we will do another plate, but we need to have a strong amount of evidence.
This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and I am your host. I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking, and it is our goal on Series 3 of Platemark to interview as many people as we can who occupy the wonderful world of prints and printmaking, the ecosystem, as I like to call it. Today's episode is with Julia Samuels, the master printer and founder of Overpass Projects in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which is just outside of Providence. It is exciting to see younger shops like Julia's make their way in this crazy world and gain an audience and succeed. Overpass Projects came to the Baltimore Fine Art Print Fair, the first ever, last spring, and her booth was incredibly busy, and I think she did well. She certainly had fun, and so did we watching her. Listen to her talk about economies of color. She's on a tear to promote this idea that less is more and more can be done with less. Before we start rolling, 3 points of housekeeping. 1, my positionality. I identify as a cis-het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. 2nd point of housekeeping, there is a support and donate button on the platemarkpodcast.com webpage. Click it for 2 options. 1, to become a monthly supporter at $5 a month, and the other to make a one-time donation. It is set at a fixed price, but there's a small button right underneath it that says change amount, so you can self-determine your donation. It will help us keep the lights on here at Platemark. It's a labor of love and takes a lot of work. And 3rd, any images that we talk about with Julia and shots that Ben and I took while we were at Overpass Projects in August will be available to you over at platemarkpodcast.com. What I didn't say was that Ben and I visited Julia at Overpass Projects together. We both happened to be on the East Coast at the same time and hooked up to go see her. So you'll hear him in on the conversation as well. All right, buckle up, let's roll. We are in Pawtucket, Rhode Island today with Julia Samuels of Overpass Projects. We are glad to see you.
I'm glad to see you too.
I know, we saw you in Baltimore in March, but summer breaks and everything. We're in Rhode Island, taking the chance to see you in person. We're in your shop, which is so fun. I love a shop.
Welcome.
Thank you. So our usual shtick is to find out tell us your name, what your business is, and what you love about it.
Okay. My name is Julia Samuels. That's the easy one. Business, Overpass Projects. I'm a fine art printmaking publisher. And what do I love about it?
Why don't you tell us how you came to printmaking?
So what happened was my high school art teacher was a printmaker and showed us reduction block printmaking. And the assignment was to make 10 little doodle drawings. And that day I probably made 150. I was like, okay, done. Like, this is what we're doing now. And I was just committed for life.
Whoa.
Yeah.
It just clicked?
Just clicked. There's so many things about printmaking that I love, starting with the marriage of the artistic expression with the chemistry, the physical nature of the equipment, the logistical hurdles. You have to be a real scientist and an innovator and a problem solver to manage or function inside a print studio. So I saw printmaking almost immediately as a combination of an artist and a scientist, and I was really into that. And then, of course, the social democracy of the whole scenario where you're making something in a multiple. I mean, I will go on and on about the politics of it and how important newspapers are and how important free speech and the First Amendment. I truly see printmaking as upholding that. In addition to that, the idea that your final piece of artwork is not a precious thing, the idea that a piece of art could be made so that anybody could access it, or that the artist could share it or gift it and not have to feel like they've lost. Painting, I love painting. I own a lot of paintings. I make a lot of paintings. They're very precious in that I can spend however much time on this painting, and it's the only one. And maybe that's sort of a good thing, but I see it as, I don't want to say anything negative about painting, but I see it as, in a way, too precious. I want to be able to share. And you've seen me at the fairs. If I'm talking to somebody for a long time, like, I'll give them a $20 print. Like, I don't even care. And printmaking allows that, right? Anything less mass-produced than printmaking, you just can't do that. You just couldn't behave that way.
But mass is a slight overstatement.
Well,
I mean,
sure.
the limited quote-unquote edition is usually between
Right.
25 and 50, maybe.
But those other mediums, the default is a singular versus
Right.
the
Sure.
default of a multiple.
I mean, part of my point is, like, the things that are precious to me are my blocks. And the prints are cool,
Interesting.
but the thing that's to me is of real value are the blocks.
But also, Ben and I have talked about this before, the whole idea of unique being better is a false hierarchy anyway, right? So we just need to switch people's thinking about what the nature of multiples is versus unique work. Like, it's not lesser, it's just in a different column, I guess.
We're also in a mode of printmaking where it is unique. I'm not making reproductive prints. I'm not making prints that are copies of paintings. There is no piece of artwork that I am copying into print. The print itself, while a form of multiple, the print itself is the original art piece. So is number 1 any more or less unique than number 5? My answer is they're both unique. Anybody could argue this for a long time, but as unique as the painting that was made as itself to begin with, sure, there's only one object of it, but my artwork is just as original.
Yeah, I agree. At your shop, you make your own work, but you also do work with other artists.
When you were starting Overpass, how did you think about that structure?
Assuming I thought about it.
I was just going to say, look at your face.
You know, I think it goes back to how to get representation or how to get eyeballs on your work in the 21st century. You know, the idea that a gallerist is going to stumble upon me and find me and want to represent me. Not saying impossible, but I am saying pretty low chances. So if you're a self-representing artist, you're in one bucket. The craft fair sort of bucket. Etsy bucket. No shame. Make plenty of money that way. No shame. As soon as you start to do something like a print house, or as soon as you start to represent other artists, I'm living in two worlds where I'm an artist, but I'm also a dealer and somebody who's representing other people. So a question I get asked a lot is, where can I go to your gallery? Or, oh, so you run a gallery or whatever. And it's like, no, I don't, but in a public-facing way, I almost do. The Editions and Artist Book Fair, you can't just go and represent yourself. You have to have a group of people that you're representing. So I wouldn't say that it was in order to give myself a better platform. I have always wanted to do collaborative printmaking. I think there's something really special about that. Inviting other people to Overpass Projects was partly the goal to be able to qualify for the Baltimore Fine Art Print Fair or anything like that. Assuming that some gallerist, you know, there's not a line of people at my door banging to represent me or whatever. I would say one of the things that is a drawback about what I do is that when I do go to the print fairs and present my work, there are gallerists that walk through there and they say, oh, so you have representation. And it's like, I mean, no. So it's a difficult position to be in. I don't know, difficult, but it takes a lot of explaining, I guess, which is fine.
But you're in charge of you have your own agency. You're in charge of your own.
The autonomy.
Yeah.
It's great. It's a double-edged sword, but I wouldn't have it any other way. When I'm really up against the wall in here and I'm really frustrated and things aren't going how I want them to, I definitely remind myself that you could still be at your old job.
And what you're speaking to is, I think one of the intentions on our end of trying to flesh out this ecosystem, particularly within print, that as much as there's so many different roles and so many different people working in different, little corners of this world, that the structure that we have does not cover all things, and that there are gaps, that hybrid situations, or I don't know what you want to call them, but there's definitely ways of making it work and having a sustainable creative life that does not neatly plug into the system as we all found it, right?
Sure.
So I think it's beneficial for everyone to talk to people like you and hear some of those ways that people are navigating this ecosystem, right?
Sure. And admittedly, I've taken on a lot, maybe inadvertently, but if I was just publishing collaborative printmaking, that would be enough. Or if I was a contract printmaker working in collaborative printmaking, published by somebody else, that would be enough. That would be a full-time job. If I was just an artist, that would be a full-time job. If I was just a sales representative, a dealer, that would be a full-time job. And there are some of those occupations that I can't give up. And then there are some of those occupations that make the rest of it possible. Part of Overpass, or part of the first chapter of Overpass, was doing collaborative publishing on my own to make a name for myself, so anybody who wanted to hire a contract printer would see my reputation and be able to see, oh, they did that work with this artist, let's go for that. And so if I grew a reputation to the point where all my jobs were artists paying me up front for my collaborative printmaking expertise, that's essentially the goal, or was 5 years ago, when I didn't know what was possible or what I could do, right? I am definitely at a point where I know that I never thought doing any of this would have ever been practical. I know that I never thought, you have, I don't know, bucket list or life goal or whatever. Even something as simple as getting a print in an established museum collection. 10 years ago, never would have thought that would actually happen.
Really?
It was on the list of goals.
Right.
It was fully on the list, but it was like, oh, that'll never happen.
As an artist or as the printer?
As an artist.
Okay.
As an artist. Well, both, but.
And that's happened?
And that has happened a few times. My stuff personally is at the Library of Congress, is at the RISD Museum, is at the Hood Museum, and a few others. Well, no, Wesleyan Print Collection, I think. That might be it. We have a long list of placements I've been able to make with the collaborative work that I do, which is very exciting. It's something that people who aren't familiar with print publishing or collaborative print work don't necessarily understand. We're both putting our blood, sweat, and tears into this.
Yeah, the whole giving credit to the printer / publisher, if they're the same person, on museum walls has always been a topic of discussion between print people and the rest of the museum. And in our last institution, Ben and I we were only able to do it in a very print-centric show. If it was a couple of prints in another more wide-open show, we would never put the publisher on there. Felt that it was too much for the audience to take in.
But meanwhile, perpetuating the singular artist genius kind of myth, which is something that the historians and curators I feel like a lot of the responsibility definitely falls to us to undo some of those myths that we came up with.
And I was just at a museum this weekend where I had the idea they never sacrifice a line for the people that donated it.
No, that's true. And some of those credit lines are really long.
Or like how it got, which association or associates of which department, whatever, like that information's always on there.
Well, that's why we're doing this podcast, because we believe that prints need more respect.
Just as you were explaining that, especially seeing the result of a collaborative print experience is all the better, is all the richer and more complex and interesting and intriguing, having an awareness of all of the hands that went into it. Sure. you know?
Well, and like usually when I send out an invitation to potential artists or potential Overpass artists, I emphasize the idea that the project ought to be something that neither of us could do by ourselves. I do invite printmakers to come work with me. I try to lean on people who aren't deep in the print world or aren't printmakers. But when I do invite people who have experience with printmaking, I stress I want it to be a project that you need me for, that we couldn't do on our own, that brings some sort of the Overpass flavor into, or that's maybe not really the right thing to say, but Amber Heaton, for instance, is someone I work with where she does a lot of letterpress and woodblock prints. She's done residencies at Center for Book Arts and stuff like that. So when I invite her in here, we're doing color etchings because I know that she can do color woodblocks and does do them on her own. And I love them. I represent them. You can go onto my website and buy one right now if you wanted to, but I didn't make those, and I'm not trying to tell anybody I did make those. But when she comes here, we make something that she couldn't do by herself.
And etching's often that thing because it does require more stops along the process than wood cutting and acid and stuff.
A little more overhead.
A little more stiff.
Yes.
You're not seeing all the asterisks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's often a challenge to convince an artist to work in a different medium that they're not used to. And there's definitely a lot of, if you're going to come for a 5-day residency, I'm prepared that 2.5 days into it, we will have made a lot of garbage, and then we might get to work. It's just how it goes. I've learned this in the last 6 years of doing this. You can explain stuff until you're blue in the face, and the person you're talking to can be like, yeah, I get it, right, yeah. And then they fully don't. Which maybe they get it and they don't agree, but until you put the ink down and pull the paper back and do it again, then the light bulbs start to go off. Then you start to make real connections where you can start to make really special stuff.
How do you build that trust with someone you're working with for the first time to make that leap?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's difficult. Each artist is different. Each one is different, right? And part of it is some people are really ready to dive in and open and are prepared for making the mistake or losing the whole plate or something. And then other people are much more reticent. And even through completing a project and placing it into collections and going all the way to the end of the line, people can be very, I don't know, cagey would be a good word to say. And I understand it in the way that as an artist, the thing that you make is extremely precious to you, your baby. And then here's this other person saying, Overpass owns the work.
Well, depending on the deal you've struck with the artist, I mean.
So there's a lot of trust that's needed, I could say. Some people are really open to it and in an understanding way that like, I can make something else, we're gonna make something else, or even, this is gonna work out. This is an opportunity for both of us. This is definitely gonna work out. I've seen the other work that you've done. And then other artists, you just need to hold their hand every step of the way. One thing that people are really sensitive about is censorship. And so I definitely stress with my artists over and over again that I will not censor your content in any way. Yes, I'm a curator, and yes, it is my final decision what gets hung on the wall, but I invited you, and I know the work that you already make. I know how political it is or how not safe for work it is or whatever. I invited you. Let that stand as, here's the open door. I've got a print with Michael Menchaca that's got Donald Trump is like this sort of devilish eagle pig kind of thing, and all of the Republican senators are pigs with spikes and snouts and stuff, and they're all doing the Heil Hitler to this, I don't know, devil monkey thing, and there's all these swastikas in the background. And Michael was worried, like, I'm Jewish, my mother's Jewish, and regardless of that, it's still a very sensitive thing to reproduce, right? It's still a sensitive thing to make and to represent. And he was really nervous that I was going to not want to do it. And I explained to him, I was like, mentioning the First Amendment, this is the point. One of the things that makes me proud to be an American is that we can make that print. And that the point of this press is so that we do stuff like that. So the last thing that I'm going to do is try to tell the artist that I've already invited, that I've already opened my doors to. It's like, oh no, that's too many nipples. Like, we can't do that. That's too many swastikas. Like, that's not allowed. And of course, like, if somebody's going to be like pro-Nazi, like pro-bigot, I wouldn't have invited that person to begin with, right? So so that's where I don't want to keep rambling.
Well, you've talked about inviting artists to come. And I asked you this in another recorded session that we did that's on YouTube, you can find it, about how artists who you haven't worked with get to work with you, and if you are open to being approached as opposed to you finding them.
I am open to being approached. But I will say the trust thing has to come. Okay, so like most of the artists I work with so far have been friends of mine previously to working with me. And if I have an artist from out of town, I'm having them stay in my guest room. And we're in here 24 hours, like we're face to face for 7 days in a row. So I gotta like you, like a little bit, right? Like it can be any kind of thing, but if you wanted to come for 2 days and pay a day rate to mess around in the studio, and then you take whatever, if it was a contract job, the artist would come here, they would pay me for my time, they would take everything they made, and that would be the end of the deal. Or they leave the plates and they hire me more to edition it or whatever. And I don't have to put anything on my website. I don't have to represent everything that I've made on Overpass. Also, I won't represent everything I've made at Overpass. If I do a job that's a contract where someone's going to pay me up front for my time, if they want it represented is half of the question, right? Do I want to represent it? So I always leave myself that option.
Your work that I am most familiar with are your linoleum cuts of Streets of Providence and environs. And when I first realized that your logo was a full-blown rainbow, I thought, wait, hold on. So, and then when you come into your shop, there's a lot of color on the walls and lots of cool grids that look like tests and things. I'm fascinated by the idea that in your own work you focus mostly, I'm sure you do color, mostly in black and white, but really you're a natural colorist and it comes easy to you.
This has always been a confusion for myself, in a way. And I will say the true logo is the black and white, and it's a highway overpass.
Right.
The rainbow is about its printmaking color ombre. Like, I'm not anti-pride at all, but like that's not what I'm trying to say. But anyway. I always ask myself, why linoleum cut? Why relief printmaking? Why black and white? And I think it's because it's harder. I think it's because I am a natural colorist and I do find it very easy. Not that it's unsatisfyingly easy, but that woodcut and black and white presents that much more of a challenge. I know that in my woodcutting studio, I do all my woodcutting at home. And so while I'm cutting, my mind is always saying stuff like, why are you doing this? Are you sure you have to do this? You know, what made you think, I'm always trying to answer those questions for myself. I definitely know that in woodcut, forward is the only direction. So if you're and forget about printmaking, if you're in painting, if you're in drawing, the medium is plastic and you're going back and forth, and that opens the door for indecision. And I'm somebody who is tremendously ambivalent. And so when you force yourself to choose, cut it or don't cut it, this is what I find most difficult about it. Not only do you force yourself to make a decision, black or white, yes or no, once you've made that decision, you can't go back and say, oh, I'm going to redo it. Forward is the only direction. Do it or don't do it. And I think that is a hard place for me to function, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I don't know, I feel like I sound like a crazy person explaining it like that.
You sound unusual to me. I mean, don't most artists find the thing that they're good at and stick with it? And
You're saying I'm not good at it?
No, not at all. Just that you have set a road of challenges for yourself with lots of...
So I don't like to say this to people, and I sound really pompous when I say it, but I'm really good at a lot of things. I chose this, I mean, I also feel like in school there is a focus on, formulate a brand for yourself, formulate a style for yourself, be sure of what you are and where you're going and what you're doing and what you look like, and don't confuse people and blah, 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 blah. And, if I'm ambivalent, I'm also didactic. My point is, people are going to know it's you. Telling a 20-year-old student that they have to formulate a style and live in that style forever, that's ridiculous to me. It will be evident. I definitely feel like I can do both, or I can do all of it. I understand what, especially in presenting the work and trying to, if you're having a studio visit with somebody and you show people work from 6 different movements, it's very confusing. And it's better to just choose one and go with that one hard. But that's not how my brain works on the inside. You know what I mean? I'm everywhere all at the same time. I'm thinking of 45 things all at the same time.
And is that one of the things that you find attractive about collaborating? Because you're constantly getting that different input or those different parameters?
I do find it exciting, right? Printmaking is exciting because you're always trying to problem solve something new anyway. Working with a different artist is exciting because, same thing, everybody holds the medium a different way, everybody manages the medium in a different way, everybody's goal is different. Figuring out better ways for individual artists to work, or how the technique needs to alter to fit the vision, that stuff's exciting. Printmaking is exciting in that way that it is always different even though it is the same, it's also different every time. I will get bored of a certain process or a certain trajectory and then come back to it. The last large woodcut that I accomplished, I started it, worked on it for like a year, and then didn't touch it for like 8 months. And definitely did other stuff, definitely made other linoleum cuts and made other etchings and made paintings and did collaborative work with other people, but didn't touch it, and then finally came back to it. It ebbs and flows, right? I would be pretty sad if I had to choose one thing and only do one thing.
I said that you were doing linoleum cuts, but then you started saying wood cuts, but then you went back.
I use them interchangeably.
Do you?
I mean, I have, obviously I know the difference. In talking about my own work, I generally use them interchangeably.
Huh. So what are you doing in your own work?
The medium you're carving into is?
Linoleum. I did a lot of carving in MDF, which we won't do that anymore because it's really toxic. It's really hard. It's full of glue, which is really mean on your chisels, and formaldehyde from time to time, which is not good to be around. And linoleum is soft and you don't have to sharpen your chisel. It's better. It's more expensive. I definitely did a lot of MDF back in the day because I told myself that I couldn't afford linoleum. Mm-hmm. And then I figured out how wrong I was. Yes, MDF costs 10% what linoleum costs. If you're going to make a 3x4 foot cut, how long are you going to spend on it? My cuts probably take they probably take 200 hours. And so when you divide the cost savings over 200 hours, it's come on, dude, just buy it. Just spend $100 on the thing and it'll be better. Your life will be better.
When an artist comes in, you have a lot of presses. So what techniques do you offer an artist?
Here at Overpass, We have a overarching goal to be able to do 30 by 40 inches in every medium. Not letterpress because the letterpress can only be 14 inches wide, but screen printing, etching, linoleum cut / wood cut, relief printmaking. I do have a litho press. It is not currently functional. We do have the intellectual capabilities for lithography. The studio is not ready, I'll say, but it could be if you really wanted it to be. Like,
Do you have stones or
Yeah.
Yeah. Where'd you find those?
oh, all over. People always ask, where'd you get all your stuff? A lot of eBay, a lot of just being in the right place at the right time. I bought this one from Rob Swainston because he was in my shop in Brooklyn, and he was just bragging about having just bought a 48-inch Charles Brand. And he's all, oh, my 40-inch Weplo, like, what am I going to do with it now? Like, I don't need it anymore, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, what are you going to do with it now? Just being in the right place at the right time. My Vandercook lived in Park Slope for its whole life, and I used to be a member at the Guana Studio Space in Brooklyn, and they have a letterpress, and one of the members called me up and they said, do you want, and it's like this big giant clamshell thing with one of the fan belts that like could take your arm off kind of thing. And he asked me if I want it, and I just bust out laughing at him. After a little while, I say, like, the minute that you decide that you can't take the Vandercook, like, I will be there. So finally, the guy with the thing in his basement says, like, now or never. And so finally they called me, and I went to go get it.
Do you have friends with trucks and you just say, come on, we're going to go move something? Or do you have to hire a gang? Or how does it, these things are huge and heavy.
I don't know. It's different every time. The Vandercook was in the basement. Somebody had carried it down there by hand anyway. So the guy in Park Slope was part of one of these, CrossFit gyms or whatever, and he got 8 of his friends, and I brought a $100 bill for each one of them, and I said, get it in the truck. And then, of course, I'm pulling away in the truck, and they're like, what, you're driving? Where are you going? And I'm like, yeah, they let women drive these things. Wild.
Oh, my God.
They're like, where's your driver? What are you talking about?
Jesus. Well, the shop is large, but it is sort of a triangular shape, sort of a puzzle, yeah.
Yeah, loading dock,
Helpful.
lift gate,
Helpful.
pallet jack.
Yeah.
With a long enough lever, you can move the world.
There you go. Do you want to talk to us about the economy of colors?
Do I?
Well, there are these really beautiful grid prints behind us, etchings that have swatches, I guess, of possible combinations of colors and layers, and
Correct.
they're beautiful,
Thank you.
but they're instructive.
They are instructive. So here's the point where it'll be easier if I show you some things.
Okay,
as
well, you
I
have to
try
bring
to
them back to the
as
mic.
I try to explain myself. Do you want to talk about screen printing or do you want to talk about etching?
Good question. The system is different for both, I suppose. Yes.
The idea is similar.
So Julia is pulling out some things for us to look at, and we're going to do our best to take pictures of them and share them on the show notes so everybody knows what the heck we're talking about. They're small. They're, what are those, 12 by 12 maybe? Ish?
Probably more like 10 by 10.
Okay.
And we understand in screen printing that it is a binary experience, meaning when you print, you're printing 100% of whatever you're printing, and what you're not, like, that's silly. You're printing 100% or 0.
Yeah.
There's
There's ink or no ink.
There's ink or no ink.
Right.
The ink can be any color, the ink can be any transparency, but there's no a little bit, kind of a little bit more. There's no gradation between yes and no. It's either yes or it's no.
Well, that's true in wood too, right?
That is sort of true in wood. Oh. It's supposed to be, but I just saw a bunch of really...
Oh, no.
Theoretically, yes.
Okay.
From the position of I'm a printmaker and I'm a colorist, and I totally understand when I print red and I print navy blue, it's going to give me a darkish, mostly blackish brown color. Like, me in my head, like, I get that. And so if I want to do a screen print of a sunset, then I can do it. And I can, on my 4 different stencils or whatever, I know how to do it. But to try to relay that information to a different artist who's going to try to draw stencils on their own, an artist who's not that familiar with screen printing, and also maybe an artist who isn't so intuitive understanding what color mixes are going to look like. And this goes back to like building trust with an artist. I developed this system to build trust with one specific artist. It worked. So the story is basically, you know, you print 1 color, you get 1 color. You print 2 colors, you get 3 colors. And so how can I show the artist without, you know, talking their ear off and not knowing whether or not we actually get each other? And then once you add the 3rd color, now you've got 7 colors, then you add this, I'm losing track of the numbers, but it does a power of 2 every time. So these screen printing color palettes were designed so that day 1, the artist comes in here and together we are choosing which colors we're printing. So you can see how here the black is a much more brilliant blue and here the black is a navy. And so by producing these palettes, the artist is now able to decide, oh, I like those combinations, but I wish these combinations were a little bit more yellow or a little bit more orange. And so we'll tweak the colors. And then finally, what they'll have a takeaway is, you know, I'll let you take this and I'll say, okay, these are all the colors that you can paint with. These are all the colors that you can actually use in your design that are going to employ these colors in all of the overlaps. And so one of the things I always go back to is I try to be as efficient as possible. And so when an artist brings to me a composition that's red and black and blue, 3 layers, I say to myself, can't we do this in 2 layers? Can't we do this easier? Or if they have 4 layers or whatever, say, okay, you're using red, yellow, and blue, and then you have this 4th brown color or whatever it is, like, can we figure out how to do it more efficiently? Or on the other side of it, if I'm going to print 4 colors, promise me you're going to use all 16 colors, because why leave some in the dust, right? Like, if you're only going to use half the palette. And often it's because it's hard to imagine what those combinations are going to actually look like. So this system, I designed it to be able to work with Michael Menchaca so that we could have a very literal visual representation of what the different mixes are going to look like. And what it has turned into is, in screen printing, it's the starting point for every single project I work on. It's really helpful because we don't go back and forth over, are you sure that it's opaque enough? Are you sure that it's the right color? What color is this? It just takes out all the guesswork. The artist and I will primarily work on the color palette, and then they'll start drawing. And then at that point, the goal is that they finish the stencils by the time the residency's over, or by the time they have to go home. So yes, it's efficiency in terms of we're getting all the work out of however many layers we're printing, but also efficiency in terms of I need to get all the artist out of the artist before they have to go home. You know, if I have this proof approved color palette and then all the stencils, that's enough. You don't have to be here. I wish you were. I like it better when you're here, but also it's fine if you can't stay.
Within the collaborative print world, we use the language of translation and, an artist's changing mediums, yada, yada, and you're really wonderfully providing a dictionary, right? You're providing a
glossary, right?
Yeah. And so it's a way to communicate, right?
Exactly.
This may sound super elementary to you, but I have a feeling that there probably are a couple of listeners that don't exactly understand what the color separation, stencil, how does an artist make a drawing in color? How do you separate it into the 4 colors that you're going to use? Do you do it in a computer? How does that work?
Everybody's different. A lot of artists are starting in the computer
Ah.
with their drawing, like, David Hockney drawing in the iPad kind of thing. A lot of artists begin in the computer, and if that's the truth, then it's easy, quote, to Photoshop, sort of magic wand, select, pull out which colors ought to be in which stencil.
So now you're a Photoshop expert too?
I mean,
I hate Photoshop.
You have to be.
Jesus.
tell me what I can't do.
Okay.
No, that's the best way to get me to do something, is tell me I can't do it.
Oh, good to know, everybody.
And even working for Andrew, like he for his autobiography of the garden, the engraving plates needed to be steel faced every 20 or 30 impressions or so.
Talking about Andrew Raftery, right?
Yep.
Okay. Providence artist who did a fantastic set of transferware engravings on dinner plates that Julia was the printer on.
My mentor and supporter and number one champion and fairy godmother, and
He's amazing.
so I printed his autobiography of a garden in this room on that press. And the plates needed to be steel-faced about every 30 impressions. And
I thought still facing was supposed to hold up forever.
I mean, well, okay, so autobiography of a garden is engraving printed not on paper but on glaze, not with ink but with glaze. So the ink, quote, the ink wasn't ink, as I said, it was glaze, but it's made out of some pretty abrasive stuff that is much more abrasive than ink, so the steel facing wears away much more quickly.
Gotcha.
And is also the reason why we steel faced at all, because if the steel facing is going to wear away very quickly, then the copper plate is also going to wear away very quickly. So
And it takes them 10 years to finish the project, so you don't want to screw it up.
listen. when he told me that he wanted me to print his project, I was like, me? Are you sure? He's like, oh, you'll do great. The first round, I drove up to Wingate Studio, and Peter helped me do the steel facing on the plates. When it was time for the second round, Andrew was basically like, well, why don't you set it up at Overpass? And I was like, well, because I don't know what I'm doing. And he's like, oh, you'll figure it out. Oh, you can do it.
I love you,
like,
Andrew.
okay, if you say so.
Can I back us up? We've talked. Sure. We have the figure in your life of the high school art teacher who was a printmaker, and we have Andrew Raftery, who was graduate school mentor, and you could have done anything in those intervening years. What was it about art? What was it about printmaking that made you want to go to art school? You know, what can you? What did you know that was always an option? I mean, a lot of people have no awareness that art is anything but a nice hobby.
I definitely recognize that thinking that art school was an option is a point of privilege. But at the same time, I honestly didn't think I would ever have a career in art. And I think the briefest way that I can answer that question is I knew that I couldn't not pursue art. I knew that it wasn't ever a hobby for me. And I knew that I would be very unhappy if I didn't do it. I guess I thought that I was gonna go and get a BFA in printmaking, and then when I needed a real job, I would go back to school for some other degree and get a real job, I guess. I don't know. When you're in kindergarten and you fill out your bio, they say, what do you want to be when you grow up? It was always artist. Like, it was never anything but that. But of course, when I got into chemistry class and physics and stuff, like, I really wanted to work at a nuclear power plant. I did really want to be a lawyer. And then when I learned about printmaking, it was like, somehow it's this nexus of all these things. The First Amendment thing is huge for me. The social democracy is huge for me. And then when you see me actually in the etching studio, like, I am a chemist. I've got all the beakers and the graduated cylinders and the gear and everything. Printmaking quickly showed itself as almost the answer to all the questions. It's so much more, and Okay, so I never thought it was practical to want to grow up and be an artist. And I also never wanted to be an art teacher. As a child, I believed that art was not something that you could teach. I have a totally different viewpoint about that now. But as a child, I thought I didn't want to be an art teacher because artists are already artists. I think I thought because artists are already artists. Or I must have thought there's nothing to teach or something. And then when I learned about printmaking, I was like, oh, there's all this stuff to teach. There's all of these employable skills. Not only did it make more sense to me to be a printmaking professor versus a painting professor, but it made a lot more sense to me in terms of being employable or hireable.
Was there a moment where your eyes were open to that transition between an artist who uses print? When did you learn about all these other roles, like the collaborative printing, or going beyond an artist whose medium is printmaking?
I mean, it must have come from... So I went to Pratt for my undergrad, and so you're going to, in the printmaking department, they're telling you, okay, like it's print week, like you have to go to the IFPDA fair. And so you go there and you see like, oh, there's companies that work with other artists, right? So I probably learned that way. And before I went to grad school and when I was moonlighting as an artist, effectively, I always had the dream of doing collaborative printmaking also, because I can see printmaking as it could be applied to your work. Like if I look at your work, I can R&D the best way to get printmaking into you rather than you into printmaking. It's how do we fit printmaking into the way that you're comfortable working. So I did several compositions with artists on a collaborative basis before I was ever a company, before I had an outlet to represent anything. I would see some friends drawing and be like, oh my God, that has to be printmaking. We have to do printmaking. Let's do printmaking.
I see people fly by on Instagram and I'll DM them and be like, we need to talk printmaking. There are definitely people who you're like, why aren't you making prints?
Yeah. It's because they don't know how, or they don't know that they can, or they don't know that people like us are out there. And, sometimes they don't want to. Sometimes they just like it the way that it is, which is also fine.
But I always feel like those people are mired in that hierarchy nonsense of unique and painters are better and, all that stuff, which we could talk about, but we won't.
There's some secrets that Andrew has given me for sure. The list of museums that own my work right now, and not if they were paintings, they wouldn't. Tell you that much. And maybe that's just because I've been shown the ropes in a certain way, but I think that, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I'm going to guess that a museum has a lot more storage in the room full of flat files than they do in the stacks and the racks for all the other stuff. And I'm not, I have no idea about budgeting in terms of like which department gets more of a budget for new acquisitions, but it's doable from my position to get, Princeton University just acquired a large suite of printmaking from Overpass Projects. I don't know what it's like for painters and sculptors, but I don't think it's easier.
The thing that I think is so cool about a project like Andrew's or the prints that you've been able to place in institutions is that, that when the print people see each other, we're all like, oh, did you buy the plates? Yes, I bought the plates. That was, we all have this shared vocabulary, images and, nomenclature and all that stuff. And because we're all the underdogs, we all know each other. So, but, it's...
And because they're multiples.
Right.
It allows for multiple places to have them. It's not you're not in that binary of if I have it, that means you don't, which is beautiful on logistically to metaphorically. And, and we definitely, Anne and I talked about in season 1, go back, keep scrolling, that print departments often are in a unusual position within a museum to be able to acquire faster, younger, sooner. You can acquire something, and if it goes into a box for 30 years, a lot of times that anecdote is said as a negative, but as the as the receiver of that history, every week you'd be in a box and be like, thank God they got this 30 years ago, because we would never be able to get it now that that person has been approved and accepted. And okay, so you went to undergrad, you were fortunate enough to be in New York and be witness to the awe of New York Print Week.
Well, and it's not just Print Week either. We got to take a tour of Brand X or Harlan Weaver or where, even Robert Blackburn. Like, you get to see these places, and you get to, and something that was really fun about New York is that it's honestly demystifying in this way of, like, you meet these people. Like, I've met Chuck Close, I've met Kiki Smith, like, I've met these people, and you tell your parents, like, I met Chuck Close, and they're like, who? But, they're right across the street. They're on the subway too, I guess. I don't know what my point in saying that was, but seeing the work at the print fairs, visiting artists' studios, visiting printmaker studios, it gives you this perspective that it's achievable, that these people are human too, right? And so, like, yeah, like, this is my dream or my goal, and here's a human being actually doing it. So, like, what makes me think that I can't do it, right? And that started in New Hampshire too. Like, I was really lucky to grow up in the school system that I did, where, that's another podcast, but New Hampshire has a long history of poor funding decisions in terms of education. And I grew up in a pretty rich town and had a pretty rich public school where even doing art once a week in elementary school is a privilege and is a thing that not nearly enough students get to enjoy. So, and my mother too is taking me to MFA Boston, or like even taking me to the theater or the ballet or anything like that. Just being exposed to the existence of art and artists just opens your eyes to all the possibilities. Like, it's not just in a history book, and it's not just people from the 14th century hung on the inside of the museum, but it's actually people today also, and they're right down the street.
When did you open Overpass?
Officially founded in 2015. So finished Pratt in 2007, finished RISD MFA in 2015, immediately started building Overpass. The following year, 1 year, install, start projects, whatever, that fall was the first EAB fair. Wow. And I had the big Rhino, and I had one Michael Menchaca, and I had one Haley Hughes, and I had some of my prints. And it was a huge reckoning for me, because like I brought my prints because I thought that I didn't have enough stuff, and they sold, and I was like, holy shit. And like you just never I don't know, maybe it was my dad is too snarky growing up. It's like, oh, that'll never be practical. You like just get it in your head that it'll never be practical and it'll never work out. It's like, all right, like one guaranteed way to make sure it never works out. Don't try. Like, don't even try. And here we are. And it's just been one thing after another. If I had ever sat down and said, okay, this is what I'm going to do, like, there's no way I would have done it. Worried about money or financial security or whatever. Up until grad school, like, I always had a job, and I would have studio visits. People would say, like, what do you mean you're not a full-time artist? What do you mean you have a job? I was like, are you joking? Like, I gotta pay the rent. I don't know what you're talking about. But it has turned into one thing leads to another, one thing leads to another, one thing leads to another. So like writing an 18-month business plan is worthless because you have no idea what's going to happen. I have no idea what's going to happen. And in this business, one sale is the difference between paying the rent and not paying the rent. I mean, one sale is the difference between paying the rent for a year and not paying the rent. You know what I mean? Like, so to hang your hat or to worry about the budget forecast, it's just a waste of time. It's just an absolute waste of time. You couldn't predict it if you tried. I used to be much more fiscally responsible, let's say. 3 months of spending in the bank, 6 months of spending in the bank, whatever. We don't operate that way anymore. And it's fine. And one day, if I don't have the rent money, we'll change what we're doing.
And then on top of all of these various hats, you also do teach?
I do, yeah.
What would you tell your younger self about the role of an art teacher that has changed? You said that that your philosophy has changed from your younger self who didn't think there was anything to be taught.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. No, there's loads. There's loads to teach. Well, and it's such a naive point of view, too, because I probably told myself as a 10-year-old, there's nothing to be taught, where, like, even just primary color theory, red, yellow, blue, or, like, you have to put gesso on the canvas before you can put paint on it, like, anything like that. There are definitely things to teach. And just because I think it comes very naturally, or because it comes very naturally to me, doesn't mean it comes naturally to somebody else. And I will also say that my view on the idea of talent is significantly different, where it's, Chuck, I hate to keep bringing him up, but Chuck Close says, what was his quote that says,
people wait for inspiration, everyone else goes to work?
Gets up and goes to work. And it's, talent is 5%. Talent is 3%. You have to get up and go to work. You have to do the job. And this is what I say to my students. Like, what do Beyonce and Tom Brady have in common? They get up and try again. Are they the best? I mean, are they the best? Why are they the best? They're the best because they don't stop trying. They don't stop working. And I tell my students, you fail when you quit. And here we are. So talent, so work ethic, but practice. Everybody will tell you that practice makes it better. So am I the best linoleum cut artist in the world? No. But am I way better than I was 20 years ago? Yes. And if I keep doing it every day, will I continue to get better? Yes. Everybody starts somewhere, and you practice and you're dedicated and you move up or forward or something. Even Andrew Raftery's Autobiography of a Garden, again, like, we know him to be an exquisitely talented engraver. If you tried to guess which order he carved the plates in, you can tell he gets better. He gets better. I definitely know that watching him do that, like, I didn't literally watch him engrave his plates, but, I'd print one plate for 4 months and then he'd show up with a new plate and I would print that one, and you can see the progression. So to confirm the idea that even at a later stage in your career, you continue to improve because of practice and dedication. And so what does talent have to do with it? Extremely little. It's probably more like I just like it, like I think it's fun, rather than that I'm talented, right? Like a painter can practice and be dedicated because it's fun. They have fun mixing the paint or putting the paint, I like doing it, so I keep doing it. And that's where the practicing dedication comes from.
But the starting point has to be a little talent, right? No? Okay, all right.
Well, I mean, I teach a drawing course, and basically I tell everybody, the first is, and it's like super parochial, but like the first assignment is draw your favorite shoe. And then the last assignment is draw your favorite shoe. And so on the last day, we hang up the first one next to the second one. And the question is, do you see an improvement? And that's all I'm looking for, right? Okay, someone's a few yards farther down the line than somebody else is. But that doesn't mean the first guy can't catch up.
No, but when you're a kid, most of the people I've talked to and asked, when did you know art was a thing? Well, I was good at it as a kid. I could make the thing look like that thing. And so you get encouragement from your teachers and your parents, and I think there's some little sort of push you get there from that initial being able to render something.
Sure, I agree with that, but my point is that doesn't mean that if the other student got the same positive reinforcement, that they couldn't also achieve the same or better.
Right.
Yeah,
I go with that.
the variable there feels more on the grown up and how they navigate that situation.
And like teaching an art class at a university where the most of my students are not going to be artists. My main goal is generally, even just to teach them that point, is that if you practice, you'll get better. And I like to teach in a way that I hope I'm teaching life lessons that if they try to put two and two together, they can apply them into other facets of their life. Don't give up just because it's hard. Like, don't quit just because you don't know where to go. Have some autonomy and be a little bit innovative and try to experiment. And if it doesn't work, try it again. What does Tom Brady do? He tries again. He gets up and tries again. You ever listen to a press conference, Belichick and Tom Brady, the reporters always want to ask about what went wrong during the game, what went wrong. And they always say, on to next week. We're looking at next week.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Have we asked her enough things?
We didn't even talk about etching.
Shit. Well, yeah, so the screen print color overlay mixy thing, palette that you give the artists is one area. And I assume that something must change when you switch to etching, but the end goal is the same of producing a palette for the artist to use.
Sure. The short answer is yes. The long answer is I have stumbled on a body of work that more or less originated here, but has become something else. So, like in screen printing, where you want to have a visual representation of what the artist will get so they can set expectations and they can design based on what you've provided. I like to do the same thing in etching. So first thing you asked was the basic difference. So the basic difference, forget about plate making, equipment, printing process, acid, material, whatever. The basic difference is, which is a lot, but the basic difference is in screen printing, it's binary. It either prints or it doesn't. In etching, it's variable. With one plate, you can get a tonal range of any one singular color using aquatint.
Okay.
We can talk about silhouette and cross hatching and line etching, and this is next year. But this year we're working in aquatint. So aquatint is the powder dust ground that falls on the plate that allows you to create a dot screen so that you can get a patch of flat tone rather than a line or an incised whatever or a stippled dot or something like that. Aquatint allows you to etch the plate so that one plate can carry multiple shades or tones or tints of one color. So if I'm going to print blue, I'm going to be able to have a plate that has wicked dark blue, medium blue, and pretty light blue, and then also zero blue. It's not quite continuous tone, but it's the same idea. So in screen printing, when you have one color and you have another color, then you end up with three colors. But in etching, let's say you have a plate that has 4 tones of red, and then you have another plate that has 4 tones of blue. Now what you get from 2 different plates, you get 16 options, and then so on and so forth. So when an artist comes in to draw a color etching, you want them to have confidence to know if I do 70% on the purple plate and 40% on the orange plate, this is the color that it's going to look like. So I had an artist in here, Eric Deal, last summer, and we were working on a 3-plate color etching, and you can see there's a little Venn diagram thing over there. I made him one of those we talked for 45 minutes about which colors we wanted the plates to be. It was probably like 2.5 hours. We talked about what color. And so I printed him a Venn diagram of the mixes of the different colors, and he's looking at it, 3 days into the project, he's looking at it, and he says, this doesn't have all the overlaps. And I was like, oh no, you're right, it doesn't. I thought I make mistakes too. I thought it did. It had the major ones, but it wasn't good enough. So then I started making aquatint grids that do have all of the overlaps. And the first one I made was based on 7 different tones per plate, 3 plates, 7 different tones, gets you 343 different results. And it continues to go back to this idea of getting the full employment out of what we're doing. So maybe the thesis that I'm working on is you don't ever need more than 3 plates. You definitely don't ever need any more than 4 plates. And everybody's different in terms of how they produce their work. Sometimes it's just easier to do it in a direct way and say, okay, if they want this emerald green right there, like we'll just make a plate for the emerald green and it'll be right there and that's it. But it crushes my soul a little bit to make a plate and not make a marriage color, not make another layer out of it, right? So my perspective is something like, if we're gonna make a color etching, I'm gonna try to do it in as few plates as possible. If you can truly prove to me that you need another plate, like we will do another plate, but we need to have a strong amount of evidence. And I really do like a certain obtuse color mixing in a way where you result in colors that don't necessarily fall in line with what you would think they would be. Like with Eric Deal, I have one print that's a really bright orange and it's a blue. You think blue plus orange complements equals brown. There's so much green. There's so much green in the print, and it's because you can figure out how to fake it. Orange is red and yellow, right? It's a teeny tiny amount of red that actually makes it look orange. So if you understand the ink more on the recipe rather than what it actually looks like, then you can understand how orange plus blue actually can make green. Does that make any sense? Because it's like mostly yellow, and so like the little tiny bit of red that makes it look orange. When you do mostly yellow and a little tiny red plus blue, that's green.
Okay, great.
It's a little muted, like it's a little lower chroma. So I've been working on all these color grids. So I made the 343 color grid thing, and so the idea there being the artist gets to choose the colors it's printed in, and then we print, and then you can see the range of everything you need. The funny part is that I haven't even actually used it that way. I used it up there to make all those swatches, but I made an edition of it in just like the most beautiful rainbow that you've ever seen. And they sell, like we just sell it like that. So I haven't needed to use it as a tool yet. And then that led me to, now what I'm working on is the color grid, the 343 color in a random order. So the first print that I made is all orderly in an, I don't know what else to say, in an order.
Chromatically.
Yeah,
Okay.
like it's like all dark at the top and it goes lighter, and then it's all dark on the left and it goes lighter. So it has a logic to it so that you can follow the map of how do I make that color? Like it's obvious from the layout how it gets made. And then so I've been working on that same thing but randomized. So those plates over there, what I'm working on is 3 plates, 9 tones each, 729 colors organized randomly.
My head hurts.
So you have to create a structure for the randomness to occur within.
Agreed. It's been a thing.
Jesus.
No wonder you don't listen to anything while you carve. Your brain is busy
I don't
enough.
listen about art, that's for sure. I don't listen about art, but yeah. But so I want to show you some visual stuff, but
Yeah.
if we want to like,
Yeah, we can wrap it.
maybe this is for like round 2. I don't know. It's a lot. It's a lot.
All right. Well, I have to say to the people out there, Julia came to the Baltimore Fine Art Print Fair, our first one ever, this last spring, 2022. And my husband was so enamored of one of these etching grids in blues and greens that it's at home ready to go to the framer. So if you can get my husband hooked, yeah, so well done.
Sales runs in my blood.
Right, you are a good salesperson. Those shoes. So EAB, the Editions and Artists Book Fair, is not running this year for whatever reason, lots of them. And so you're not showing in New York in the fall.
I am showing in New York
where are you
in the
going?
fall at the New York Satellite Print.
You're going to do satellite.
I'm going to do Satellite.
Great. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see you there.
There you go.
And then I think she's in for next Baltimore Fair next year, which is on the calendar already for the end of March. So I look forward to that. Yeah. You did good at that. You were busy at the fair. There were tons of people in your booth all the time.
I know.
Yeah. It was great to see. It was great.
It's, it's fun. I always have fun at fairs like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we all had a good time.
I'll be there next year.
You better be. I couldn't believe you missed this one after all this time, Ben. Jeepers.
And I've said this several times, but one of my favorite parts about the Baltimore Fine Art Print Fair is that, unlike in New York, where all of the very established print houses are at the IFPDA, Overpass enjoyed being on the same level as all of those guys that we've heard their names for a really, really long time. So that level of affirmation. Overpass has only existed since 2015. I didn't feel out of place or like I was too young or inexperienced or like I didn't belong. So that was a big, with Gemini across the street, and then I feel like I belong here is really a big reckoning for me. It was trying to trade him some of my work for an Ed Ruscha. It was like, it's above me. Like, maybe they'd go for it, but I'm not allowed to make that decision.
Nice. Wait, that's an idea. We should have a little print exchange in the back room. See what we can come up with. Oh, that's hilarious.
It was a pleasure to get to talk to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for doing it.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, it's always a pleasure talking to you, smarticles. Yeah. Thank you for listening to this episode of Platemark with Julia Samuels. It's always fun to visit printmakers and master printers in their own shops, and this episode was no different. Thanks to Julia for letting us invade her space for that morning, and also a special thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. Next time, we have a special episode which is dropping in 1 week as opposed to our usual 2-week process. On October 18th, the interview will be with Latoya M. Hobbs, who's a Baltimore-based printmaker who has won a commission from the IFPDA to enact a large-scale installation called Jeanette's Daughters at the front of the fair. It's one of her trademark relief carvings. It will be shown alongside her portfolio of portraits of the founding members of Black Women of Print, those artists who contributed to the Black Women of Print's first portfolio, which was called Continuum, that was published by High Point Editions. Meanwhile, that portfolio, Continuum, which is a mixed portfolio by the Black Women of Print, will be on view at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, so make a trip over there to see that. Latoya will also be participating in a related program at the IFPDA Fair, a panel discussion that will be moderated by Kimberly Gant, a curator at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. That talk will be on Friday, October 28th at 1:30 at the Jacob Javits Center, which is where the IFPDA Print Fair will be. The IFPDA Fair is open from October 27 to 30, and you should all go. It's a transformative place. I think they have 70-something vendors this time, and you will never see that many prints in one place ever again. And a quick reminder that any images that Julia talked about and any images that Ben and I took with our phones while we were in the shop will be over on platemarkpodcast.com. And also over on that website is that support and donate button. Help us keep the lights on and donate today. Okay, we'll see you next week.